Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back into the dark streets of Victorian England, a world filled with elegance, luxury, and terrifying fashion trends that secretly destroyed human lives, from painfully tight corsets to poisonous green dresses. The people of the Victorian era risked their health every single day just to appear wealthy and beautiful. As the cold fog rolled through London streets and gas lamps flickered in the distance, millions of people followed dangerous beauty standards without fully understanding the deadly consequences hidden beneath silk gloves and expensive fabrics. The gas lamps of Victorian London glowed weakly through the endless fog as the streets filled with the sound of horse carriages rolling across wet stone roads. People believed the Victorian era was a time of elegance and beauty, but hidden beneath the expensive dresses and polished manners was a darker world filled with dangerous fashion trends. Many women spent hours tightening their corsets until they could barely breathe. The ideal beauty standard demanded impossibly small waists, and young girls were taught from childhood that pain was simply part of becoming beautiful. Some corsets were pulled so tightly that ribs slowly bent inward over the years. Doctors of the time often warned wealthy families that these garments crushed internal organs and caused constant fainting. Yet society ignored the dangers because appearance mattered more than comfort. Grand evening parties. Women smiled politely while secretly struggling to catch their breath under layers of silk and bone. But Victorian society believed suffering was a necessary part of beauty. Inside massive ballrooms, lit by crystal chandeliers, women carefully walked across polished floors while hiding dizziness and exhaustion beneath polite smiles. Some fainted during dances because their corsets restricted normal breathing so severely that even climbing stairs became difficult. Servants quietly carried smelling salts in their pockets because sudden fainting episodes were extremely common among wealthy ladies. Guests rarely questioned the situation because society treated these moments as perfectly normal. In fact, many men considered a pale, weak appearance attractive because it symbolized delicacy and high social status. Far away from the luxurious mansions, the workers who created these fashionable clothes lived in terrible conditions. Small factories filled the air with dust, chemicals, and unbearable heat. Children and young women spent long hours sewing dresses beneath weak candlelight, while toxic substances covered their hands every day. Many workers developed chronic coughing fits after breathing dangerous particles trapped inside crowded rooms. The wealthy customers wearing elegant gowns at royal gatherings rarely thought about the suffering hidden behind every piece of fabric. For them, fashion was entertainment, but for factory workers, it often became a slow, painful death. As the Victorian era continued, fashion became more extreme. With every passing decade, new beauty trends appeared constantly, and many people followed them without asking whether they were safe or even reasonable inside elegant London shops. Wealthy customers searched endlessly for products promising youth, pale skin, and perfect appearance. Shop owners proudly displayed powders, perfumes, and creams inside glass cases while advertisements claimed these products could transform ordinary women into symbols of beauty, but hidden inside. Many of these cosmetics were dangerous chemicals that slowly poison the body over time. One of the most popular beauty products of the era was skin whitening powder. Pale skin represented wealth because it suggested a person did not work outside under the sun.to achieve this ghostly appearance. Women covered their faces with thick layers of powder containing lead and mercury.at first. The makeup created the desired smooth porcelain look, admired throughout high society. But after months or years of daily use, the damage became impossible to hide. Some women developed painful skin sores while others lost teeth or suffered serious illnesses caused by toxic exposure. Doctors occasionally warned against these products, but beauty standards remained stronger than medical advice. Many Victorians preferred risking their health rather than appearing unfashionable. At social gatherings, hair fashion created dangers as well. Women spent hours styling enormous hairstyles supported by pins, oils, and heavy decorations. Some hairstyles became so large and complicated that women slept sitting upright to avoid ruining them. Overnight, expensive hair products promised shine and elegance, but many contained harmful ingredients that damaged the scalp. Over time, in rare cases, stories spread about insects hiding inside large untreated hairstyles because washing and maintaining them properly became extremely difficult. Despite the discomfort and embarrassment, society continued praising these dramatic appearances as signs of sophistication and refinement. Victorian men also faced dangerous fashion expectations, tight collars wrapped painfully around the neck, and heavy wool suits became unbearable during warm summers. Many fashionable men wore stiff hats for long hours. Every day, even while working, some hats were produced using mercury during manufacturing, and factory workers who made them slowly developed strange psychological symptoms. They experienced shaking hands, memory problems, and unusual behavior caused by mercury poisoning. This condition eventually inspired the famous phrase, mad as a hatter, though many people today do not realize the terrifying historical truth behind those words. Meanwhile, the streets of industrial Victorian cities grew darker and more polluted each year. Thick smoke from factories covered entire neighborhoods, while overcrowded housing trapped poor families inside unhealthy conditions. Yet, despite the suffering surrounding them, the wealthy classes remained obsessed with appearance. Newspapers and fashion magazines encouraged people to constantly chase unrealistic beauty standards. Artists painted portraits of noble families, dressed in luxurious clothing while carefully hiding the painful reality behind their elegant appearance. Even children were pressured to wear uncomfortable formal clothing for long hours because proper presentation mattered deeply in Victorian culture. Perhaps the saddest part of these deadly fashion trends was how normal they became. People witnessed fainting, burn injuries, and sickness so often that society stopped reacting with shock. What would seem horrifying today was treated as ordinary. Life during the Victorian era, beauty had become a dangerous performance, and millions participated willingly because fear of social judgment controlled nearly every part of their world. The as night fell across the foggy streets of London. The glow of gas lamps illuminated a society where elegance and suffering walked side by side. Late at night, when the crowded streets finally became quiet, the true exhaustion of Victorian life slowly revealed itself behind the elegant curtains of wealthy homes. Women carefully removed heavy dresses, tight corsets, and painful shoes after hours of discomfort. Many could see deep, red marks pressed into their skin from clothing worn too tightly throughout the day. Some struggled to breathe normally, even after loosening their corsets, because their bodies had slowly adapted to years of restriction. Still, the next morning, the same painful routine would begin again, because society demanded perfection at all times. Outside the luxurious neighborhoods, the poorer districts of London told a completely different story. Factory workers returned home covered in dust and smoke after endless hours of labor. Many women who produced expensive fashion items could never afford the clothing they spent their lives creating. Children slept in overcrowded rooms while toxic air drifted through narrow streets filled with industrial pollution. The beautiful gowns admired in royal ballrooms were often stitched together by exhausted hands working deep into the night under dangerous conditions. Yet, despite the suffering, the Victorian world remained obsessed with appearance. People believed elegant clothing represented morality, respect, and social value. And no matter how dangerous the fashion became, millions continued following these trends because fear of judgment was stronger than fear of pain. And so, beneath the soft glow of gas lamps and the endless London fog, the Victorian era continued hiding its dark secrets behind silk, perfume, and polished smiles. As the 19th century slowly moved toward its end, new inventions and modern ideas began changing Victorian society. Doctors started speaking more openly about the dangers hidden inside fashionable clothing and beauty products. Some newspapers published shocking stories about women becoming seriously ill from toxic makeup or deadly fabric dyes. For the first time, parts of society slowly questioned whether beauty was truly worth such terrible suffering. But changing public opinion proved difficult because these fashion traditions had controlled people's lives for generations. Even as warnings increased, many wealthy families refused to abandoned their luxurious lifestyles. Expensive dresses, corsets, and jewelry remained powerful symbols of status and respectability at grand social events. People continued pretending everything was perfect while ignoring the pain hidden beneath elegant appearances. Music echoed through crowded ballrooms as dancers moved carefully beneath glowing chandeliers, and outside the windows, the cold London fog drifted silently through dark streets. For ordinary people living during this era, life often felt exhausting and unforgiving. Beauty demanded sacrifice, society demanded obedience, and survival itself could be difficult in rapidly growing industrial cities. Yet, despite all the hardships, the Victorian age also left behind unforgettable stories, strange traditions, and haunting images that still fascinate people today. When we look back at old photographs from this period, we often see elegant smiles and beautiful clothing. But hidden behind those images was a world filled with pressure, danger, and quiet suffering beneath the surface of luxury. In the final years of the Victorian era, the world slowly began stepping into a new century filled with electricity, machines, and modern technology. But even as society changed, many people carried the emotional weight of decades spent chasing impossible standards. Old habits remained difficult to escape, and countless families continued teaching their children that appearance mattered more than comfort or health. The pressure to look refined had become deeply woven into everyday life. Photographers during this period captured thousands of portraits, showing elegant women in massive dresses and serious men wearing dark formal suits. At first glance, the images appear calm and beautiful, but behind many of those frozen expressions were stories of exhaustion, illness, and sacrifice. Some women spent nearly their entire lives trapped inside painful beauty routines, while workers in factories quietly suffered to support the luxury enjoyed by the upper classes. The glamorous image of Victorian society often hid a far darker reality beneath polished manners and expensive fabrics. Long after the Victorian era disappeared, its strange beauty standards continued, influencing future generations. Many modern fashion trends still carry echoes of the same pressure that once controlled Victorian society, the desire to appear perfect, to hide flaws, and to impress. Others never truly vanished. It simply changed form with time. Historians often say the Victorian age was a world trapped between elegance and suffering, a society where appearance became more valuable than personal well-being. Walking through old Victorian buildings today, people can still feel the atmosphere of that distant world. The narrow hallways, the heavy furniture, and the dim candlelit rooms create an almost haunting silence that in museums. Carefully preserved dresses stand behind glass displays, showing just how massive and restrictive Victorian clothing truly was. Some corsets appear unbelievably small, making modern visitors wonder how anyone could breathe while wearing them every single day. Old diaries from the era reveal private thoughts, rarely spoken aloud in public. Many women quietly described exhaustion, pain, and loneliness hidden behind their elegant lives. Some admitted they feared social humiliation more than physical suffering because reputation controlled nearly every opportunity. In Victorian society, to lose respect within high society could destroy a family's future. And so people continued pretending everything was normal, even while silently struggling. Today, the Victorian age remains one of history's most fascinating and mysterious periods, not only because of its grand architecture and royal traditions, but because it reveals how deeply society can shape human behavior. The foggy streets of London, the glowing gas lamps, and the endless obsession with beauty have become symbols of an era filled with both glamour and hidden tragedy. By the early 20th century, the Grand Victorian world had finally begun disappearing into memory. New generations slowly abandoned some of the dangerous customs that once dominated everyday life. Corsets became less extreme, fashion changed, and scientific discoveries exposed many hidden dangers people had ignored for decades. But although the era itself ended, the stories left behind continued haunting the imagination of future generations. Writers and historians often described Victorian England as a place of contrasts, where luxury existed beside poverty and beauty existed beside suffering. In wealthy districts, music and laughter echoed through enormous halls, while only a few streets away, poor families struggled to survive among smoke, pollution, and overcrowded housing. The same society that built magnificent architecture also created brutal working conditions for countless laborers, hidden from public view. At night, the streets of London must have felt almost dreamlike. Horse carriages moved slowly through thick fog, while distant factory smoke covered the moonlight. Even today, when people watch old Victorian photographs or walk through ancient streets in England, there is a strange feeling that the era never completely disappeared. The black and white portraits show calm faces, dressed in elegant clothing, but behind those silent images were real people carrying fears, dreams, and exhausting responsibilities. Many Victorians spent their entire lives trying to satisfy the expectations of society while hiding their personal struggles from the outside world. Children during the Victorian age were also raised under strict discipline. Boys were expected to become respectable gentlemen, while girls learned proper behavior from an early age. They practiced perfect posture, careful speech, and polite manners because even small mistakes could damage a family's reputation. Schools often used harsh punishments, and emotional expression was usually discouraged in upper class society. People believed discipline created strength, but for many children, it created fear and pressure that followed them into adulthood. Meanwhile, the industrial cities continued growing larger and darker. Factory whistles echoed through the morning air as thousands of workers filled crowded streets before sunrise. The rich enjoyed luxurious dinners beneath golden candlelight, while poor families struggled to survive inside tiny cold apartments. This enormous gap between wealth and poverty became one of the defining features of Victorian England, and many social problems remained hidden behind the polished image of refinement presented to the world. As the long Victorian century faded into history, it left behind more than beautiful architecture and elegant fashion.it left lessons about vanity, social pressure, and the dangerous cost of chasing perfection. And somewhere within the endless London fog and the dim glow of gas lamps, the spirit of that complicated era still lingers quietly in the imagination of the modern world. For many people, the Victorian era represented progress and civilization. Railways connected distant cities, new inventions transformed communication, and the British Empire expanded across enormous parts of the world. From the outside, it appeared to be an age of confidence and power, but beneath this image of greatness, millions of ordinary people lived difficult and exhausting lives hidden from history. Books, workers spent endless hours inside dangerous factories while strict social rules controlled nearly every aspect of personal behavior. In wealthy homes, daily life followed carefully organized routines. Servants quietly prepared meals, cleaned enormous rooms, and maintained the appearance of perfection expected by upper-class families. Even conversations at dinner tables followed unwritten social rules. People carefully protected their reputation because public embarrassment could destroy social status almost instantly. Many Victorians feared shame more than unhappiness, and this constant pressure created a society obsessed with appearances. As night covered the vast city of London, the Victorian world became quieter, but never truly peaceful. Fog drifted slowly between narrow streets while distant factory machines continued working long after sunset. Inside grand mansions, the wealthy rested beneath warm candlelight surrounded by expensive furniture, silk curtains, and golden decorations. But only a short distance away, thousands of poor workers struggled through cold, dark nights with barely enough food or heat to survive. The same city contained both extraordinary luxury and heartbreaking poverty existing side by side. Many Victorians believed hard work and discipline could solve every problem, but reality was often far more cruel. Children sometimes began factory labor at very young ages, working exhausting hours in dangerous conditions. Some climbed inside massive machines to clean moving parts, while others carried heavy loads through dusty workshops filled with smoke and chemicals. Accidents were common, and injured workers rarely received protection or support. Despite these hardships, the industrial world continued expanding rapidly because factories generated enormous wealth for powerful business owners. Religion also played a major role in Victorian society. Churches filled every neighborhood, and people were expected to follow strict moral behavior in public. Many families hid personal problems behind polite smiles because social reputation mattered deeply. Divorce, scandal, or public shame could permanently damage a person's future, and so countless individuals silently carried emotional pain without speaking openly about it. The pressure to appear respectable shaped nearly every part of Victorian life. Yet, even within this difficult world, people still searched for beauty, comfort, and meaning. Music echoed through concert halls. Writers published unforgettable novels, and families gathered together beside fireplaces during cold evenings. The Victorian age was never simply dark or beautiful. Alone.it was both at the same time. A complicated era filled with ambition, elegance, suffering, and mystery. And as the fog continued rolling through London streets beneath the pale glow of gas lamps, the world of Victorian England slowly moved deeper into history, leaving behind whispers of a forgotten age that still fascinates people today. By the time the Victorian era finally came to an end, the world had already begun transforming into something entirely different. Electric lights slowly replaced gas lamps. Cars started appearing beside horse carriages, and modern ideas challenged many old traditions that had controlled society for decades. But even as technology advanced, the memories of Victorian life remained deeply connected to the image of foggy London streets, elegant clothing, and silent suffering hidden behind polite manners. Historians today often describe the era as one of the most fascinating periods in modern history because it combined incredible progress with severe hardship. As the 20th century moved forward, the memory of Victorian England slowly transformed into legend. People began romanticizing the era, imagining it as a world of elegance, grand parties, and noble traditions. Movies, novels, and paintings often focused on the beauty of Victorian fashion and architecture while ignoring the hidden struggles experienced by ordinary people. But beneath the polished image remained countless untold stories buried deep within history. Old Victorian houses still stand in parts of London today. Their dark wooden staircases and narrow hallways carrying echoes of another age. Some buildings feel strangely frozen in time, as though the footsteps of servants and the quiet conversations of wealthy families never completely disappeared. When rain falls against the windows and fog covers the streets, it becomes easy to imagine horse carriages moving slowly through the night beneath rows of glowing gas lamps. For historians, the Victorian era remains important not only because of its inventions and empire, but because it reveals how deeply social expectations can shape human lives. People followed painful traditions, dangerous beauty standards, and exhausting routines simply because society demanded obedience. Appearance became a performance, and many feared public judgment more than physical suffering itself. Yet within this Complicated world there was also. Resilience, families, continued building lives despite hardship. Writers created timeless literature, and ordinary people searched for moments of happiness inside difficult circumstances. The Victorian Age contained both darkness and beauty, existing together in uneasy balance. And so, the long shadow of Victorian England continues surviving through photographs, stories, and silent memories left behind in ancient streets that as the fog drifts once more across London and distant church bells echo through the cold evening air. The spirit of that forgotten world still lingers quietly beneath history, waiting for curious minds to listen to its hidden stories one final time. Even after more than a century, the Victorian era still feels strangely alive in the imagination of the modern world. Perhaps it is because the age left behind such powerful images. Fog covered streets, long black coats, glowing gas lamps, and elegant women walking silently through enormous halls filled with candlelight. There is something mysterious about that world, something both beautiful and unsettling at the same time. During quiet evenings in Victorian London, the sound of carriage wheels echoed across wet stone roads, while cold air drifted through narrow alleyways. Shops slowly closed for the night, and distant church bells rang softly through the heavy fog. Inside crowded homes, families gathered around fireplaces searching for warmth, while outside the industrial city continued breathing smoke into the dark sky. As the final years of the Victorian world disappeared into the distance, the old streets of London slowly entered a new age. But even with modern technology replacing ancient traditions, the atmosphere of Victorian England never completely faded from memory. There remained something haunting about the era, something hidden beneath the fog, candlelight, and silence that still captures the imagination of people more than 100 years later. On cold winter evenings, the city often seemed trapped inside an endless gray mist. Gas lamps flickered weakly beside narrow streets, while horse carriages rolled slowly across wet stones, their wheels echoing through the darkness. Inside towering buildings, wealthy families gathered around elegant dining tables covered with silver plates and crystal glasses. Servants moved quietly through candlelit rooms, pouring tea and maintaining the illusion of perfection expected in upper class society. Every movement, every word, and every gesture followed strict rules shaped by reputation and social status. But outside those luxurious homes, the reality of Victorian life could be harsh and unforgiving. Industrial Revolution had transformed England into one of the most powerful nations in the world. Yet millions of workers paid a terrible price for that progress. Factory chimneys covered entire districts in black smoke, and overcrowded neighborhoods trapped poor families inside unhealthy living conditions. Many children worked exhausting hours before they were even old enough to understand the world around them. Some sold newspapers in freezing weather, while others labored inside dangerous factories, filled with loud machines and toxic air. The pressure of Victorian society extended far beyond physical labor. People constantly feared humiliation and judgment from others. Women were expected to appear graceful and calm no matter how much pain they experienced. Beneath tight corsets and heavy dresses, men carried the burden of maintaining respectability and financial success while hiding emotional struggles behind formal manners. In public, everyone performed carefully constructed roles because reputation controlled nearly every opportunity in life. Yet, despite the darkness of the era, the Victorian world also possessed a strange beauty, the glow of candlelight against old wooden walls, the sound of rain tapping softly against windows, and the quiet elegance of long, forgotten streets created an atmosphere unlike any other period in history. Writers created timeless stories, artists painted haunting portraits, and families searched for comfort beside warm fireplaces during cold evenings. Perhaps this is why the Victorian age still fascinates the modern world. It was not simply an era of beauty, nor merely an era of suffering. It was both at once. A world where luxury existed beside poverty, where progress existed beside cruelty, and where behind every elegant smile there was often a hidden story waiting silently beneath the surface. The deeper one looks into the Victorian era, the more complicated and mysterious it becomes. What appeared from the outside to be a civilized and elegant society was often built upon silence, sacrifice, and invisible suffering. People rarely spoke openly about fear, loneliness, or exhaustion because Victorian culture valued self control above almost everything else. Emotions were hidden behind polite smiles, formal conversations, and carefully maintained appearances. During long evenings in London, the wealthy attended grand parties, illuminated by chandeliers and candlelight. Music floated through enormous ballrooms, while guests danced across polished floors dressed in expensive fabrics imported from distant parts of the British Empire. Every detail of appearance mattered: the correct posture, the proper greeting, and even the smallest social mistake could affect a person's reputation for years. Many individuals lived under constant pressure to appear perfect in the eyes of society. At the same time, the industrial districts surrounding the city told another story entirely. The sound of machinery echoed endlessly through crowded streets where factory workers returned home, exhausted after dangerous shifts. Children, carrying tools or newspapers, hurried through the fog before sunrise while smoke from massive chimneys darkened the air above. London, some families lived packed together inside tiny rooms with barely enough warmth during winter months. Disease spread easily through overcrowded neighborhoods, and medical knowledge remained limited compared to the modern world. Victorian England was also deeply fascinated by death and mourning. Families often covered mirrors after someone died, and people wore black clothing for months or even years to show grief. Photography became increasingly popular during this period, and some families even took portraits beside deceased relatives as a way to preserve memory. These traditions may seem unsettling today, but for Victorians, death was a familiar presence woven into everyday life. High child mortality, disease, and harsh living conditions meant many people experienced loss regularly throughout their lives. Yet, even within hardship, the Victorian age created extraordinary beauty. Great libraries, museums, and theaters rose across England. Writers such as Charles Dickens described both the elegance and cruelty of the era, revealing the struggles hidden beneath society's polished surface. Trains connected distant cities. New inventions transformed communication, and scientific discoveries slowly changed how people understood the world around them. Perhaps that is why the era continues haunting the modern imagination. There is something unforgettable about the image of Victorian London, the dim glow of gas lamps, the sound of rain against stone roads, and shadowy figures disappearing into endless fog.it. Feels like a world suspended between reality and dream, a place where beauty and darkness existed together in uneasy silence. As the 19th century slowly disappeared and the modern world approached, Victorian England left behind a legacy filled with both brilliance and sorrow. It was an era where enormous progress changed human civilization forever, yet countless ordinary people quietly suffered beneath the weight of strict traditions and industrial expansion. The streets of London became symbols of this contradiction, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Late at night, the city often felt almost unreal. Fog rolled heavily between dark brick buildings while gas lamps cast weak golden light across wet roads. Horse carriages moved slowly through the silence, and distant footsteps echoed against stone walls. Inside luxurious homes, the wealthy rested beside warm fireplaces surrounded by books, paintings, and expensive furniture. Servants carefully maintained every detail of the household, ensuring the appearance of order and refinement remained untouched. But beyond the elegant neighborhoods, the industrial heart of the city never truly slept. Factory machines thundered through the darkness while workers endured endless hours beneath clouds of smoke and heat. Some laborers spent nearly their entire lives inside dangerous workshops where accidents could happen without warning. Children often worked beside adults, despite their young age, because poor families desperately needed every possible coin to survive. For many people, the Victorian dream of progress brought exhaustion rather than opportunity. Fear of social judgment shaped nearly every aspect of daily life. People carefully controlled their emotions, speech, and behavior because reputation determined social acceptance. A single scandal could destroy years of respectability. and many individuals lived with constant anxiety about public embarrassment. Women, especially, faced enormous pressure. They were expected to appear elegant, gentle, and emotionally calm regardless of personal suffering. Many sacrificed comfort and freedom simply to satisfy society's expectations of femininity and class. The Victorian fascination with appearances extended into architecture, fashion, and even mourning rituals. Black mourning clothes, silent funeral processions, and carefully preserved family photographs reflected a culture deeply aware of mortality. Disease remained common, and life expectancy for the poor could be shockingly low compared to modern standards. Death was not hidden from society the way it often is today. Instead, it existed quietly beside everyday life, shaping traditions and personal relationships throughout the era. Yet, despite its hardships, the Victorian age possessed undeniable beauty. The sound of piano music drifting through candlelit rooms, the sight of rain falling against old London windows, and the mysterious atmosphere of fog covered streets created an unforgettable world unlike any other in history. Writers, artists, and poets transformed these experiences into stories that still captivate modern audiences more than a century later. And even now, far removed from the smoke and candlelight of the 19th century, the Victorian world continues, casting a long shadow across modern culture. Its architecture still towers above crowded streets. Its literature remains studied in schools, and its mysterious atmosphere continues inspiring filmmakers, writers, and historians around the world. There is something timeless about the image of Victorian London, a city wrapped in fog where elegance and hardship existed together beneath the dim glow of gas lamps during rainy evenings. The narrow streets must have carried a strange silence interrupted only by the sound of carriage wheels and distant footsteps echoing through the mist. Shop windows reflected weak golden light onto wet stone roads, while cold wind drifted between dark alleyways. Inside homes, families gathered beside fireplaces seeking warmth from the endless damp weather. Some spent the evening reading novels aloud while others listened quietly to piano music floating through candlelit rooms. For a brief moment, the outside world of smoke, factories, and strict social expectations seemed far away. But beyond those peaceful scenes, many Victorians carried invisible, emotional burdens. The pressure to maintain respectability affected nearly everyone. People learned to hide sadness, fear, and exhaustion behind controlled expressions because society valued discipline and appearance above vulnerability. Public reputation shaped friendships, marriages, and opportunities, and even small scandals could permanently damage a family's future. As a result, many individuals lived carefully constructed lives where true emotions remained hidden beneath politeness and routine. The rapid growth of industrial cities also changed the rhythm of daily existence forever, trains, connected distant regions, factories transformed production, and crowded streets became symbols of modern progress. Yet this transformation often came at a terrible human cost. Workers endured dangerous conditions for little pay while polluted air darkened entire neighborhoods. Children grew up surrounded by noise, smoke, and exhausting labor far too early in life. For countless ordinary people, the shining promises of progress felt distant and unreachable. Still, the Victorian age left behind extraordinary stories filled with beauty, mystery, and contradiction. It was an era capable of producing both breathtaking art and heartbreaking suffering. Writers described haunted mansions, lonely streets, and forgotten lives hidden beneath the surface of polite society. Photographs preserved silent faces staring into the future, unaware that one day their world would become history itself. Perhaps that is why the Victorian era continues feeling so haunting to modern audiences. It reminds us that beneath every great civilization there are hidden struggles rarely shown in official portraits or grand celebrations. History is never only elegant or tragic alone. As the old Victorian century faded further into memory, the modern world slowly replaced horse carriages with automobiles and candlelight with electricity. But despite these dramatic changes, the atmosphere of Victorian England never completely disappeared. There remained something deeply haunting about the era, something hidden within its fog covered streets and silent photographs that continued capturing the imagination of future generations. Many old buildings from that time still stand across London today, their dark corridors, heavy wooden doors, and narrow staircases seem to preserve echoes of another world. When rain taps softly against ancient windows and evening fog drifts through quiet streets, it becomes easy to imagine the distant sound of carriage wheels moving across wet stone roads. Inside these forgotten spaces, people once lived entire lives shaped by strict routines, careful manners, and endless social expectations. Victorian society often demanded emotional silence. People rarely spoke openly about loneliness, anxiety, or unhappiness because public dignity mattered deeply. Men were expected to remain calm and disciplined, no matter how much pressure they carried, while women were taught to appear graceful and obedient even during moments of personal suffering. Many families protected their reputation so carefully that private struggles remained hidden behind elegant smiles and formal conversations. As a result, countless individuals lived isolated, emotional lives beneath the polished surface of respectability. At the same time, the city itself continued growing, larger and louder. Factory smoke darkened the skies above London, while crowded industrial neighborhoods expanded rapidly. Workers woke before sunrise and returned home long after dark, their bodies exhausted from endless labor. Some children spent more time inside factories than at school, and dangerous machinery injured countless laborers. Throughout the century, for wealthy society, industrial progress represented national pride and economic success. But for ordinary workers, it often meant physical exhaustion and uncertain survival. Yet, even within this difficult world, the Victorian age created moments of extraordinary beauty. Public libraries, museums, and theaters opened across England, making art and literature more accessible than ever before. Writers described mysterious mansions, foggy alleyways, and hidden secrets buried beneath society's elegant appearance. Poets wrote about memory, time, and mortality, while musicians filled concert halls with haunting melodies drifting through candlelit rooms. The Victorian fascination with death also gave the era a strangely melancholic atmosphere. People preserved photographs of lost relatives, visited elaborate cemeteries, and wore black mourning clothing for long periods after funerals. These customs reflected a society deeply familiar with lost disease, poverty, and limited medical knowledge meant death remained close to everyday life for rich and poor alike. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Great Victorian world had become something almost ghost-like, lingering quietly in the memory of England. New inventions transformed everyday life. Telephones, electric lights, and automobiles slowly replaced the familiar sounds and sights of the old century. Yet for many people, the emotional atmosphere of Victorian England never truly disappeared. It remained alive in old streets, ancient buildings, and faded photographs staring silently out from another age. Walking through London during the late evening must have felt both beautiful and unsettling. Dense fog often swallowed entire streets, while weak gas lamps struggled to illuminate the darkness. The air carried the smell of rain, coal smoke, and damp stone as hoarse carriages moved slowly through narrow roads lined with towering brick buildings. Inside elegant homes, wealthy families gathered beside fireplaces discussing politics, literature, and society, while servants quietly maintained the household behind the scenes. Every detail of daily life reflected strict social rules designed to preserve respectability and order. But beyond the polished world of high society, millions of ordinary people faced exhausting realities. Factory workers endured dangerous conditions, surrounded by loud machinery, thick smoke, and endless hours of labor. Many families lived in overcrowded neighborhoods where disease spread quickly through narrow streets and poorly ventilated housing. Children often worked from a young age because survival depended on every family member contributing money. In industrial districts, the sound of machines rarely stopped completely, making the city feel constantly restless even during the middle of the night. Victorian culture placed enormous importance on self-control and public appearance. People learned to hide emotion behind calm expressions because Vulnerability was often viewed as weakness. Women, especially, lived beneath intense social pressure. They were expected to remain elegant, obedient, and emotionally composed regardless of personal hardship. Many sacrificed comfort, health, and independence simply to satisfy society's expectations of femininity and class. Meanwhile, men carried the burden of financial success and family reputation, often suppressing fear or sadness beneath formal manners and disciplined behavior. The era also developed a deep fascination with memory and mortality. Black mourning clothes, elaborate funerals, and carefully preserved photographs became common parts of Victorian life. Many families experienced frequent loss because disease and limited medical treatment made death far more familiar than it is in the modern world. Yet, despite all its hardships, the Victorian age left behind extraordinary beauty. The sound of piano music drifting through candlelit rooms, the sight of rain falling softly against old windows, and the endless mystery of fog-covered London streets created an unforgettable world suspended somewhere between elegance and sorrow. As decades passed and the Victorian age drifted deeper into history, the world around it continued changing at incredible speed. Modern cities grew brighter, faster, and louder, while the memory of old London remained, wrapped forever in fog and candlelight. But despite technological progress, many people continued feeling strangely drawn toward the atmosphere of Victorian England, perhaps because it represented a world filled with mystery, silence, and hidden emotion unlike the modern age. During cold evenings in Victorian London, the city often seemed suspended between dream and reality. Fog covered the streets so heavily that buildings disappeared into gray shadows while distant gas lamps flickered like fading stars. The sound of carriage wheels echoed across wet roads, and footsteps vanished into dark alleyways where rainwater reflected pale golden light. Inside crowded homes, families gathered beside fireplaces listening to the crackling of burning wood while the cold wind pressed softly against old windows. For a few quiet hours, the outside world of factories, noise, and endless responsibility felt far away. But the peace inside these homes could be fragile. Many Victorians carried emotional burdens they rarely spoke about openly. Strict social expectations controlled behavior so completely that honesty about fear, sadness, or loneliness often remained impossible. People learned to hide pain behind manners and politeness because reputation mattered deeply in every part of society. Some individuals spent their entire lives pretending happiness simply to avoid shame or public judgment. Meanwhile, the industrial city continued expanding endlessly. Factory smoke darkened the sky above London, while crowded neighborhoods struggled beneath poverty and disease. Workers woke before sunrise and returned home exhausted after endless hours surrounded by dangerous machinery. Some Children barely experienced childhood at all because labor became necessary for survival. The wealthy classes admired industrial progress and economic success, but for ordinary laborers, the modern age often brought exhaustion rather than freedom. Victorian England also became fascinated with mystery and the supernatural. Ghost stories, seances, and spiritual gatherings grew increasingly popular as people searched for comfort in a rapidly changing world. Many families, grieving lost relatives, believed spirits might still exist somewhere beyond death. Candlelit rooms filled with whispered conversations about the afterlife, while newspapers published strange tales of haunted houses and unexplained events. This fascination with mystery added another layer to the haunting atmosphere already surrounding Victorian society. Yet, even within darkness, the era produced extraordinary creativity. Writers composed unforgettable novels about poverty, love, and ambition. Artists painted dramatic scenes, illuminated by candlelight, while musicians filled concert halls with emotional melodies echoing through elegant rooms. The deeper the modern world moved away from the Victorian era, the more the old century began feeling like a distant dream preserved beneath layers of fog and memory. Yet, despite the passing of time, the atmosphere of Victorian England never completely vanished. It survived in silent photographs, dark alleyways, and ancient buildings, whose walls still seem to remember the footsteps of another age. Late at night, the streets of London often appeared almost empty except for the occasional horse carriage moving slowly through the mist. Gas lamps glowed faintly against wet stone roads while cold rain drifted softly across rooftops. The city breathed quietly beneath gray skies, and every narrow alley seemed to hide forgotten stories waiting somewhere in the darkness. Inside grand mansions, the wealthy rested beneath heavy blankets surrounded by polished furniture, golden mirrors, and shelves filled with books collected across generations. Servants moved silently through dim hallways, keeping fires alive through the long winter nights. But beyond these elegant homes, the industrial districts remained restless. Factory smoke covered entire neighborhoods while machines thundered endlessly. Through the darkness, workers returned home exhausted after surviving dangerous shifts inside crowded workshops where accidents and illness were constant fears. Some laborers spent nearly every waking hour beneath clouds of cold dust and unbearable heat. Yet their struggles rarely appeared in newspapers celebrating the success of the British Empire. For many ordinary families, the Victorian dream of progress felt painfully distant. Victorian society also carried a strange obsession with silence and emotional restraint. People were expected to control their feelings carefully in public because dignity and reputation mattered above nearly everything else. Women learned to hide discomfort behind graceful smiles, while men buried anxiety and sadness beneath discipline, and formal behavior. Many individuals suffered quietly, without ever speaking honestly about loneliness or fear, the pressure to appear. Respectable shaped marriages, friendships, and even personal identity throughout the era. At the same time, the Victorians were fascinated by mystery, death, and the unknown. Candlelit seances became fashionable among certain social circles as grieving families searched desperately for signs from lost loved ones. Newspapers printed stories about haunted mansions, strange disappearances, and unexplained shadows seen wandering through old London streets. This fascination with the supernatural reflected a society living between scientific progress and ancient fears. People embraced modern inventions while still feeling haunted by mortality and uncertainty. The sound of piano music drifting through quiet rooms, the glow of candlelight against rain covered windows, and the endless elegance of old London architecture created scenes that still captivate modern imagination today. As the final echoes of the Victorian age disappeared into the endless passage of time, the old world of gas lamps, fog covered streets, and silent carriages slowly surrendered itself to history. The great city of London continued changing year after year. Modern lights replaced candle flames, cars replaced horses, and the restless energy of a new century swept across England like an unstoppable tide. Yet somewhere beneath all that change, the spirit of Victorian England remained hidden quietly within the shadows of the city. Even today, when rain falls softly across old London streets and cold fog drifts between ancient buildings, it is still possible to imagine that forgotten world returning for just a moment. The sound of distant footsteps against wet stone, the faint glow of light through old windows, and the silence of empty alleyways seem to carry whispers from another century. A time when people lived beneath strict rules and endless expectations, yet still searched desperately for beauty, warmth, and meaning inside an often difficult world. The Victorian age was filled with contradiction. It created magnificent architecture, beautiful literature, and extraordinary scientific progress, while also hiding poverty, loneliness, and suffering. Behind elegant appearances, wealthy families danced beneath golden chandeliers, while exhausted workers struggled through endless factory shifts. Only a few streets away, children dreamed beside candlelight while smoke from industrial chimneys darkened the skies above the city. The same era capable of producing breathtaking beauty also carried deep sadness hidden beneath its polished surface. Perhaps that is why the Victorian world continues haunting modern imagination so powerfully. It reminds us that history is never simple. No. Civilization is built entirely upon beauty or entirely upon suffering. Human life has always existed somewhere between hope and hardship, between ambition and fear. The people of Victorian England lived within that fragile balance every single day. They loved, worked, dreamed, and struggled beneath the pale glow of gas lamps without, knowing that one day their world would become a distant memory studied by future generations. And now, as our journey through Victorian England finally comes to an end, the city slowly fades, once more into darkness. The fog drifts silently through narrow streets while distant church bells echo softly. Across the sleeping rooftops, old photographs remain frozen in time, their silent faces forever watching from another century. The grand mansions, the crowded factories, the candlelit rooms, and the rain-soaked roads all disappear gently back into the shadows of history. But somewhere beyond the cold London mist, beneath the endless gray sky of old England, the spirit of the Victorian age still lingers quietly, and with the last gas lamp flickering softly in the fog, the long Victorian night finally comes to rest.